I'm the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Art Mill Museum, which is a future museum in Qatar Museums in Doha. And we are very fortunate to be hosted by the National Museum of Qatar, which is one of our sister organizations, in order to organize this exhibition, which is called MANZAR, Art and Architecture from Pakistan, from the 1940s right up to the present day. The exhibition has 13 sections. It's been organized slightly chronologically because we're very much aware of our audiences who might not know about Pakistan so much. But that is broken very regularly by artworks from other moments in time, and with also archival material that gives other forms of contextualization. Each section has a particular theme or a particular subject. Here we find ourselves in the area that we call formalist experiments, where we are bringing together a lot of the very famous Lahore Art Circle artists, as well as other artists like Zubaydah Aga, who were active from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and who worked very collaboratively in Pakistan, informed by the idioms that they had seen during their travels or during their studies, and really beginning to create their own very distinctive styles. One of the really important aspects that we wanted to focus on was the importance of art schools, and one art school in particular, for instance, is the National College of Art in Lahore. And so the vitrine that we have here brings lots of letters, announcements, photographs of the first principals, including, for instance, Shakir Ali, who these spaces have been really sort of instrumental to enable many forms of creation to happen, and many disciplines, artists from many disciplines to be working together.
Hello, my name is Zarmeene Shah, and I am one of the curators of the exhibition MANZAR, Art and Architecture from Pakistan, 1940s to today. We are in the gallery right now called New Languages, where we sort of pivot between the modern and contemporary period. We're looking particularly at somebody who is quite influential in that move from the traditional, the modern period to the contemporary period, and that figure is Zahoor Akhlaq, whose painting you can see behind me. Zahoor Akhlaq was looking at traditional miniature painting, but also how space is rendered in those miniature paintings. He's expanding that scale. The grid is very important to his work. Often you see this cloud in the paintings, which is, he's looking at nuclear developments in the country, so his concerns are very contemporary. He's often cited as one of the most influential figures for contemporary artists in Pakistan today, including people like Rashid Rana or Quddus Mirza, some of the biggest, most prominent contemporary figures today. He was also working in sculpture. He was exploring various other forms. He was doing public monuments, public commissions, also designing logos, for example, for the Aga Khan Foundation. So very multifaceted artist, but also an academic. He was the head of the fine art department at the National College of Arts and was instrumental in the formation of what we call the neo-miniature, which is a new way of looking at miniature painting and developing this very popular movement, which is quite a specific Pakistani movement, which really has taken off, has been shown in various places across the world. Shazia Sikandar is one of the most prominent artists of that movement, and we have the next gallery which is dedicated to that movement. This is the neo-miniature section, and we begin actually with these historic works which are loaned from the Museum of Islamic Art here in Doha. These are sort of works that all students of miniature painting would be very familiar with. They would be looking at these as they learn how to paint in the miniature tradition. And we're lucky to be able to borrow these very early works by Shazia Sikandar, which are from her thesis show when she was a student at the National College of Arts, where she just begins to introduce this contemporary imagery into the miniature format. This work called Scroll 2 breaks from that traditional format into a much longer composition. And she's also looking at the way in which architectural space is looked at in the miniature tradition and how to translate that into a kind of contemporary language and contemporary imagery. But of course, Shazia goes on to do much more radical experiments and to really break apart the language of miniature, as do most of these artists. So we have also early works by Imran Qureshi, who again, you see this the changing language or imagery that they first started to use, but later Imran becomes much more known for works like the one we have behind us, which really explode in scale. And this triptych that you see here is perhaps, not even the largest scale that Imran works in. He often does site-specific works across entire courtyards and landscapes. So this is still one of the more modestly sized works. We have Aisha Khalid behind us with these tapestries, with these pins pushed through them. So if you walk around the back, you will see this pattern translated into these pins at the back. But also artists like Rashid Rana, who often cite Zahoor Akhlaq as one of their influences, and the grid that we saw in Zahoor's work really comes into play in Rashid's work here. So if it looks like a carpet, but when you go right up to it, you see that it's comprised of all of these smaller photographs. In this case, they are animals, slaughterhouses. So you have to really come up close to them to see the imagery that makes up these larger. We also have Hamra Abbas, who is looking at the porters. So in northern Pakistan, we have the Himalayas, and often mountaineers are trekking up these mountains. These are the men who are carrying all of their gear, who are helping them, who are leading the way, but who are often not acknowledged. And so this is a kind of homage to those people. And it's done, the paintings are done in lapis lazuli pigment. So Hamra has been learning how to process this semi-precious stone as they did previously in the Mughal ateliers, and to create this pigment and to work with that. In this case, Rashid's I Love Miniatures by Rashid Rana, again made up of much more smaller images, which are of the billboards that you would see across the cities of Karachi and Lahore, which then form this portrait of the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. So we are in one of the sections that we call subjective figurations, in which we're looking at a quite contemporary time now, at the 80s and 90s, where you see expressions of how to be in the world in many ways, which includes, these expressionistic paintings by Qudus Mirza, but also, for example, the women's movements in Pakistan, which began with the Women's Action Forum. And we also are trying to talk about how artists were involved in various kinds of activities. So Lala Rukh, who was one of the founding members of the Women's Action Forum, but was also an academic and also an artist, an activist. These posters were designed by her. And you have a continuing tradition of that because we now have what is called the Aurat March, which is the Women's March, where you have artists like Sofia Balagamwala or illustrators like Samia Arif who are contributing again to the posters, to the creation of material around those marches and movements. We are now in a room called the Urban Vernacular. Sometimes this movement as it starts is referred also to as Karachi Pop, where these artists, particularly Iftikhar and Elizabeth Dadi and David Aylesworth and Durya Qazi, begin looking at really the materiality and the language of the cities, the bazaars, the cinemas, the hand-painted billboards, in those cities outside the cinema halls, and at truck art, the materials used within a kind of very gritty urban setting, and to try and break through this kind of hierarchy of high art and low art. And they were also collaborating with, for example, painters who were doing works that you would see outside the cinemas to promote the films, and you see the names of those painters also on these paintings. So this idea of collaboration, which is new, I think at that time lots of people across the world are thinking about this is collaborative practice, craft, tradition. What is art, high art, low art, and I think they're really breaking through the boundaries of those things, but using this very, very urban language that is particular, I think, to South Asia. They're also looking at cinema itself, so Urdu or Pakistani films, so these are stills from famous Pakistani films, and then they went on to influence a whole generation of artists, like, for example, Adila Suleiman, whose work you see here, where she's looking at these domestic objects like cooking objects, utensils, pots, pans, and that painting language which you see on the trucks and the buses and so on and so forth, and then translating it into these helmets, these sort of almost protective, as protective attire for women. And then across you see it translated in sort of metal. So we have a lot of these metal workers also in the cities. And in this work in particular, you also see the reference to older Mughal sort of imagery or miniature imagery, which is sort of speaking to, which is quite beautiful, but also when you look at it in detail, there's a lot of violence in the imagery. So again, speaking to a very contemporary moment where we live in very, very troubled times across the world. We also have all of this archival material that dots the show and provides a lot of context to the exhibits, which we've been lucky enough to source from public and private institutions, but also collectors. And this show has enabled us to be able to share that material with audiences who may not necessarily be so familiar, not just with the art and architecture, but also really the society and culture and politics of the country. Well, I think one of the things that this show tries to do is to point to the friendships, to the influences, to the coming together of various figures. So the current political moment makes you believe that these are very closed borders, and they are in many ways, but people like Souza or Murtaja Basir were coming to Pakistan. They were showing their work in Pakistan at the time. There was a lot of dialogue between people like them and Shakir Ali and Ali Imam. So the stylistic overlaps, I think, come from a place of having the same kinds of concerns, but also conversations and friendships and alliances and being colleagues in a very particular moment in history, which is not necessarily talked about so much anymore. And that was really important to us to kind of highlight this porosity in those borders and in those movements and ideas and dialogues and discourses. Well, I think the art schools have always been instrumental. Probably because in Pakistan, all of the people, or most people who are within the academic realm, are also practitioners. So all of your practicing artists, architects, for example, myself as a curator, I'm also an academic. And this, I think, really impacts the way that teaching takes place in art schools or design schools, is because the faculty are not only academics, they are also practitioners, and the students are looking at what actual practice looks like firsthand. They're also very much encouraged to look at the world around them, because this is not something that you can escape right now, a kind of context that you live in, the reality of the world that we live in, the regions that we live in. And so they're very much encouraged to be looking, reading, researching, and thinking about the moment that they occupy, the place that they occupy, and what that means in terms of practice, being an artist, being an architect, being a practitioner in a cultural, artistic realm. I think, so these are ways in which we hope to encourage students, at least, to think about what they want to be, as what the aim of being an artist today is, what is the purpose of that, what is their idea of that in a contemporary sort of world, very much looking at the place around them and the world around them.